Hi guys, Teddy Baldassarre here, and in this video we are going to be doing another Q&A. I asked the question on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, what question do you guys have for me? And today we're gonna be answering those questions. And if you wanna stay in the loop in the future for other Q&As, definitely be following me on all the different platforms. We try to post some great content on all those different places. So before we jump in, also some great new product has hit the store on teddybaldassarre.com. First, some new releases to the site. The first one has to be the Hamilton Jazzmaster Performer. So when you think of the Jazzmaster collection, typically you're thinking of more refined, dress-oriented pieces. This combines that idea with a more sporty capability. You're talking 100 meters of water resistance, a 38mm case option being available, which I think will be probably the one that most people watching here will like the most. In addition to that though, you also have some new chronograph versions, which are great to look at as well. And then for the ones that do have a bracelet, very well done for the price segment and certainly one to consider. I think this is a nice change of pace from the very much dominated khaki field collection from Hamilton. Then we also have the Club Sport Neomatic from Nomos. This was released last year, 37mm case, 200 meters of water resistance, so really awesome in terms of its versatility. It's a watch that is more than meets the eye here. And speaking of that, on the inside you have the DUW caliber, the 3001. So this is using their proprietary swing system escapement. Beautiful watch. And a couple other recent releases from Tissot. One was their C-Star GMT. This is a limited edition model just for the US market. So if this is of interest to you, true GMT, black and green bezel format with this almost anthracite kind of charcoal colored dial. Pretty unique combination, and also being a true GMT is nice. And then finally the PRX Mint. People have gone pretty crazy since this was unveiled in around late November. One of the best selling PRX models, if not the best selling PRX model since its launch. So our first question comes from Twitter, and Emily asks, "Hi Teddy, so I know buying too many too fast is often quoted as a newbie mistake when getting into watches. I'm up to 32, with one on the way since getting into it last year, and I absolutely love every single watch I have. Is it really that bad to have a watch collection?" So this is almost not even a question, it's almost just getting something off your chest, at least that's how I'm reading it. But the question I would essentially think that it's going after is, what is really too much for a watch collection? And that is up totally to you. One thing I will say is that whole concept of buying too quickly at the beginning, taking it slow, I am a huge proponent of. Is that to say that I always followed that advice and things that I get into? Absolutely not. It's hard. When you get really fascinated, I don't know if you're the same way, I get very curious. Once I get into something, I'll just develop a love for something and I'll just want to go as fast as possible, just become this collector. And I do think that part of it, you have to make those mistakes in the early stages. It's easy to say on the other side, hindsight is 20/20 when you say, sure, you should take it very slow, but I did get benefit from making mistakes in the beginning. And 1 year into your journey, you're going to learn that there are things that you have currently that you're not going to love in the future. Things are going to change for your situation and how you look at your collection. And that's fine, that's natural. The one thing I would probably say though, just to proceed with caution, is just, this is real money that we're talking about. Even if you're going for what we call affordable watches, saying something that's like $200, those add up. It's a lot of money to be throwing at anything, and those will eventually put a lot of just your income, your capital to work into a whole field that's new to you. So just be thoughtful about that. It does take some time to also sell those watches if you ever wanted to move on, and it is a challenge at times. So just be thoughtful about how you are going to change. 1 year is very early, and this is to anybody that is out there. Even for myself, I, in the grand scheme of things, still have a long way to go in my own journey. And that's the reality of this whole world of watches, which is a great thing. Just take it in stride. Don't go too crazy. Be really realistic about what makes sense for you and develop that philosophy so you're not just going after everything. I don't necessarily think that, 32, who am I to say that that's wrong? If that's what you like to do, you find passion, you can afford it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but just understand the big picture and how things very much do change. For our next question, this comes from Tim from Instagram. What can Tudor do next? The hype, albeit deserved, is dying down, and I'm not sure what their next move could be. Tudor right now is in a position where they have emerged from not even being in many of the markets that they're in now in the US where I'm at, but non-existent a decade ago. Now they've come out of nowhere and are gaining market share, being a top 10 brand in the US. That's a huge, fast rise that you typically don't see in the world of watches, especially in the 21st century. This is not something that just happens all the time. So they've been fortunate to reach a new level for the brand, and they've really been able to achieve this by having a new fixture with the Black Bay. And I don't think many people need any introduction to the Black Bay. They know what it is, but that does create a challenge on the same side. They are a little bit now dependent on the Black Bay. They had these just flurries of releases. You had the new 58s that were released now in pretty much every different colorway, different case materials, the Black Bay Chronos, now different material Black Bays, ceramic Black Bays. There's a lot to get lost in, and this is also not considering like the S&G models, the GMTs, so much to get consumed with. So now the challenge is, how do you become multifaceted where you're not just the Black Bay company? Because even if you have an icon, and I think that is a worthy claim for the Black Bay. The Black Bay now is, I think, an iconic watch, and I hate using that word if it's not necessary, but it is necessary for that watch. It's one of the best releases in the last 10 years of redefining that door to luxury watchmaking in many ways. But how do you look past that, and can you offer up more? Tudor has this also approach where, do you want to follow in the lane of Rolex, or do you want to continue to extend off to create your own identity? That's why I'm a huge proponent of the Pelagos, because the Pelagos is a model that is not really pulling from any one place. It is more of their own identity for the 21st century. And if I was going to be someone that liked the Marine Nationale connection in the past, and you think about Tudor in the 1970s and 80s, what would they make for a dive watch in that era if they could? That was their own identity. Something like the Pelagos makes a lot of sense. But where can they go from here? I think the obvious choices are, once they just clean up the final touch on the Black Bay, is starting to get the MT calibers in the conventional like Black Bay 36. That's a no-brainer. But then from there, I think they have to start to even the playing field across their collection. Go into the Pelagos more, start to build that fixture to add some competition to the Black Bay, where you're not becoming such a one-trick pony when it comes to the Black Bay. They moved away from things like the Advisor and the North Flag, but is there something more funky and out there? One thing that is missing, if you looked at Rolex head-to-head in their different collections, and then you looked at Tudor, if they did want to occupy all those different ranges, you could look at something like an engineer's watch, something that the Milgauss would occupy. Imagine something like the Heritage collection, like the Heritage Chrono, where they were able to do something with a 3-hand, and it was a little bit more understated, but had like the orange second hand. I think that would be pretty cool. That whole collection probably deserves an update, but is that a big mover? No. Now it's just kind of developing up those different pillars. What are the pillars they're going to get behind? You have things also like the style, that it is kind of like the Oyster Prince of this era, but nobody talks about that thing at all. So there are things that Tudor can still do. I think the Black Bay, although quick money probably for them to make, if they release a new model, people will talk about it, they'll love it. It does create a challenge that you become a little bit too reliant on one watch. And for some brands, they're looking for one watch in general that they can really champion and be that one. So it's not the worst problem to have in the world, but it does create a challenge as you're trying to scale out your brand to be multifaceted. Next question comes from Instagram. Could you do a deep dive into watch theft and insurance options? So this is actually a good question. I've never addressed this topic on the channel at all, which is kind of strange. So just in general, take best practices first off before we get into any of this. And I am not a professional insurance agent, so please do your own research here. Shop around, figure out your options. For myself also, because I have a business in watches, it's a little bit more nuanced for me in terms of my coverage, just how I can structure things within the business. So I have a bit more coverage than someone that's just a passionate person around watches. So that is something I'll just throw out there as a disclaimer as well. Number one, always just take proper precautions. If you're going to a place first and you don't feel that it's a best idea to wear a $10,000 watch on your wrist, don't do it. Always have the watch that you're wearing and what your whole collection is be a fraction of your total net worth. Don't let it get to a point where if you set fire to that watch, it's going to hurt you. Now, once you get past that as just a basic best practice, then you can look into actual just options available to you. And I would insure things. I would take the extra precautions with safes and things like this, because I do that as well. Now, when kicking off the insurance options, one thing I'd recommend first is just to see if you have any coverage to begin with, because chances are you're maybe either paying for renter's insurance, homeowner's insurance. See what's covered within that first. Sometimes you can add to your policy to have some additional coverage depending on how much money you're talking about for your collection. If you're talking about a lot of money, you probably are going to get something that is more specifically geared to watches and jewelry. One that is very popular in the industry, we use them to some capacity, is Jewelers Mutual. They have a bunch of different options. You can go that way. Basically, what I've seen in my research and what I've noticed is around 1% to 2% of the total value of the watch you should expect to pay every single year. That does change depending on what you're talking about, but for just generally speaking, that is something that you can ballpark in your mind. That's one that I'm familiar with. There's a lot of different options. If other people also have tried different insurance providers in the world of watches and jewelry, please leave comments down below because I know that'll be helpful for other people that might be interested in this. Based on the cost there, you can determine what's the best practice for you. As you start getting into tens of thousands of dollars in your collection, it does make sense to have some coverage and at least some extra precautions to slow people down. Safety deposit boxes, also looking at, a safe for your house and having coverage. Be thoughtful about when you transport watches and these goods, and also when you actually have them on your wrist. You should wear watches because you love them, so also just buy watches that you can afford and not feel stressed out about when you wear them. That's what it's all about. Don't let these things stress you out. This should be fun. Our next question comes from Iran from Facebook. He asked, do you think watches like Christopher Ward's Belcanto, Baron's new stuff will start a trend of bringing higher complications to more accessible price ranges, or will these remain rarities among the classic playing field with complex watches asking for 5 digits or more? Let's just discuss this Christopher Ward really quick because I'm a big fan. I also, for Burns, I didn't really know much about this brand until I was actually in a boutique. Somebody recognized me that watched the channel. He was wearing this and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. I've never seen one of those in person before. And I asked him how much it was, and I was thinking, all right, this is gonna be like, $20,000 or whatever, or $50,000. And he told me that it was like five grand. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So my answer just quickly is, I do think this is something we're going to see more. Christopher Ward with the Belcanto, that is one of the best executions of doing this very idea in the last 5 to 10 years. It's amazing what they were able to accomplish with that watch. I give them major kudos in what they were able to do. I want one now. We actually just got one of these in the office and we've been playing around with it. I'm probably gonna do more coverage of this watch if we haven't already by the time of releasing this video. And it's just a killer timepiece. I mean, what they've been able to do, creating a chiming mechanism in a watch under $4,000 for the same price of a Black Bay we're talking about here, less. You're getting a watch that has this proprietary type of movement structure, and they're able to do it at a price point that makes sense. These are the types of concepts that are going to allow brands to separate. And the big challenge for many brands, especially on the smaller tier, is how can you get the movement tech to be in your watches? Because the movement, more than anything, is going to dictate the ballpark of where you're going to fall in price. And the accessibility to those movements are going to be the big challenges for why we're seeing a lot of these watches that have these crazier complications being at the higher price tier. But if more brands can get creative, think about things in the out-of-the-box type of ways, I think this is a huge open playing field for the brands that are willing to take that risk and have the right product mix behind it. Next question comes from Instagram from Omega Enthusiast. And by the way, great place to buy vintage Omegas. This is not plugged in any way. I've purchased watches from him and it's cool to see him on here. How do you feel about VC, JLC, Longines, etc. offering vintage pieces on their official website? How will this affect their modern pieces? What kind of impressions will it give their clients? So interesting time to be asking this question because I was just at JLC visiting their manufacturer, and they also, in tandem with that, were recently unveiling their collectibles. This is their vintage, just curated collection that they unveiled with different pieces that they found out in the open world. They restored them fully, and I thought it was a really cool concept. Now, will consumers value this? This is going to be a big question because I don't know if buyers are going to want to always pay the premium that many of the brands are potentially charging for some of these restored watches. It does give more peace of mind for those brands that maybe don't have the same level of collector following, but it is going to also show credit to the fact that pre-owned vintage, it's here to stay. The brands can't even ignore it anymore, and they have to get involved as well, or they feel they need to get involved as well. So for the most part, I think it's just going to show that times are changing, brands are finding this a benefit, but if you're a dealer that has a good credible following, lots of transactions, for a consumer, I think that's typically probably enough for them to feel some peace of mind. But one thing I've recognized as you get farther and farther into watches is you can only really know so much for certain when it comes to vintage watches. There's always going to be some uncertainty no matter how much you know. There's things to uncover, there's things to learn, and there's always people out there that are trying to potentially fabricate some things. So you just have to be very careful. Go with people you trust, and I think that's ultimately why the brands getting involved might give a certain level of consumer some peace of mind. So I think it's interesting, but it will be also probably a challenge for some brands to adopt this if they don't have a restoration department. You mentioned brands that do, like Longines as an example, has one of the most expansive archives and restoration departments of anyone in the industry. We don't really talk about it, but they have parts like just in a surplus. I remember going through their archive and like, wait, they have like screws from like the 1800s just because they were afraid like one day they wouldn't be able to restore their watches, so they just overproduced all of them. Not every brand can support this type of idea, so that's going to also be a challenge for some, is do they even want to do this? How I see it is not really as much of a commerce play for them. It's more of just kind of getting a good marketing engine for their history to showcase that we did some really amazing things in the past, and then maybe use it as a testing ground for potentially new product in the future. And our final question here comes from Twitter. Hi Teddy, I really love Breguet, their designs and history. Do you see a rise of the brand as people are slowly becoming tired of sports pieces everywhere? What do you think about their position in the market? I'd love to hear your opinion. Before I touch on the Breguet thing, I think we're gonna see a cycle here the next few years where dress watches are going to become cool again. I don't know if we're there yet, but just give it some time. I think we're gonna start to see more collectors go that direction. But speaking to Breguet, I believe it is probably the most underutilized asset maybe in the entire watch industry. And the reason why is the name Breguet should, if it was able to continue the path and not have these uninterrupted changes of ownership throughout, say, the 1800s and 1900s, what could the brand potentially be? Because Abraham Louis Breguet was not only potentially the greatest watchmaker ever, but he was just a genius by any standard. I was fortunate enough to actually visit Breguet's HQ, and I was asking their CEO, we were talking just about what he would be doing, and he was very adamant about, he was the inventor. Breguet was the inventor. Abraham Louis Breguet was the inventor. And if he was alive today, there's a good chance he wouldn't even be in watchmaking. He would be in Silicon Valley. He'd be an innovator. That's how he looked at that world. And that's why I think what he was able to produce during the 18th and 19th century was just absolutely remarkable. We always hear about the tourbillon, but perpetual winding mechanisms, the overcoil, many of the design inspirations in terms of Breguet hands. Also, guilloche was widely adopted by the brand and became more popularized because of their different techniques. It was invented beforehand, but this was an art that he really mastered. Also, I learned when speaking and visiting Breguet that they were very quick to mention that Breguet was also like an inventor of the CRM and how he was able to interact with clients, and that in Paris at their museum, there's a book. And if you buy a Breguet watch, you can get your name written in the book that also has Napoleon Bonaparte's name. Also looking at Marie Antoinette, like these type of individuals are in this book. I had no idea. So now if I go to a boutique and I want to buy a Breguet, I'm going to ask for that. And apparently anybody can do it. So that's another note as well. But Breguet in general, I think is one of the greatest assets in the world of watchmaking. I don't think people fully understand what that brand represents for many of the things that we take for granted. If you look at an F.P. Journe now, F.P. Journe probably would not be inspired to be the watchmaker that he is if he didn't have so much reverence and respect for Abraham Louis Breguet's work. Now that is not probably exactly his words, that's just my interpretation of just seeing where he finds influence and what he prides his work in. But Breguet is just simply special, and I'm a huge proponent of what the brand represents, and I think there's a lot to look forward to in the future if they could just get on the right track, finding some of the sports models, but also continuing to lean into what they do best and telling their story the right way, because it's not just a watchmaker. This brand was very much about just innovation. And I think that if they can loosen up the stuffiness and just show that this brand is cool, it's different, and it also is classical in its approach, that's where I think wins will happen for the brand. But in the meantime, for those that know, no. But all right, guys, that is my video here today answering some of your questions. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. I can absolutely do more of these in the future if you guys like them. So any encouragement with the comments down below, as well as the thumbs up button, is great to see. Also, definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.